Who agrees to a blind date they never signed up for, and stays when their own sister walks out without a word. That's exactly what Valerie Davis did. She wasn't supposed to be there. It was Kristin, her confident and glamorous sister, who got matched with a mysterious millionaire. But when Kristin saw the man, dressed simply without champagne or charm, she turned away before even learning his name. And Valerie stayed. She sat down, said nothing, and left behind a single napkin with her number and one simple line: "If you ever feel like talking in silence." Right? What followed wasn't a fairy tale. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just a man who hadn't used sign language in years, and a woman who heard more with her eyes than most did with ears. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Jason Lewis didn't look like what people expected. He liked it that way. The cafe was quiet. Nothing trendy, just warm lighting, the low hum of conversation, and a scratched wooden table near the window where he always asked to sit. He didn't want attention. That was the point of the experiment. 10 blind dates, one simple condition: he wouldn't play the part they all imagined. No tailored suits, no fancy car out front, no opening line, just him. That afternoon, Kristin Davis walked in exactly as predicted, like someone who assumed the world would adjust itself to her heels. She scanned the room like it owed her something, caught sight of Jason, and frowned slightly. He stood, out of politeness, and nodded. No bouquet, no wine, only a man in a gray coat, hair slightly tousled from the wind, nursing a quiet cup of tea. Kristin tilted her head, as if trying to decide whether she was being pranked. Then she turned. No smile, no words. She walked right past him and out the door. But before she left entirely, she paused near the window where someone else was seated. Valerie Davis sat quietly, her hair half pulled back, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. She hadn't been invited to the date. She had just come along for support. Kristin leaned close and, with a smirk, signed, "Go in yourself if you're curious," then disappeared into the street like she had never intended to stay. Valerie didn't move right away. She looked through the glass at the man her sister had abandoned. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't leaving. He just sat there, still quiet, like someone used to being left without a reason. Valerie rose, slowly, without rush or makeup to fix. She stepped inside, approached the table, and stopped just short of sitting. Jason looked up. She raised one hand, gently signing the question. "Is this seat free?" He hesitated, then nodded. A simple, silent invitation. She sat down. No explanation, no small talk, no smile, even just presence. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was clean, unloaded. They didn't order much: water, another tea. And when the waitress asked if they were expecting anyone else, Jason simply said, "No." They stayed like that for nearly 20 minutes. Not talking, just being. And in that hush, something settled. Something that didn't require introductions or pasts or performance. When the check arrived, Valerie reached into her bag. Not for money, for a pen. She picked up a paper napkin and slowly wrote in soft, curved letters. Sometimes the most important things are easier said in silence. If you ever feel like talking that way, her number. She folded the napkin in half, placed it between them, met his eyes for one long, steady moment, then lifted her hands and signed, softly but deliberately, "Thank you." She stood, buttoned her coat, and walked away. Jason didn't speak, didn't blink, He picked up the napkin, ran his thumb along the words, and let himself breathe for the first time that day. Jason didn't sleep that night, not because something was wrong, but because something had shifted. He kept the napkin on the kitchen counter, unfolded. The words weren't fancy, not poetic, but they had weight. Sometimes the most important things are easier said in silence. He had heard thousands of pitches, read proposals longer than novels, negotiated contracts so sharp they could cut bone. But nothing had lingered in his hands the way that simple napkin did. He didn't write back right away, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't trust the part of him that did. By morning, the napkin was folded twice. By afternoon, it was in his coat pocket. And that evening, he finally texted, "Your sister didn't even learn my name, but you stayed. Thank you." There was no reply for 3 hours. Then a single message came in. "You looked like someone who didn't need noise." That was all. No emojis. No name. Just that one line. Jason stared at it for longer than he would ever admit. They didn't text every day. Sometimes it was a short message. Sometimes nothing for 2 days. But every word between them felt like a puzzle piece gently falling into place. On Thursday afternoon, he sent, "You don't speak. I used to." A few minutes later, "My wife was hard of hearing. She used to sign. I haven't used it since she passed." Then silence. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. But before he could change his mind, another message arrived. "Then I'm honored you signed to me." He didn't reply, but that night, he opened an old box from the top shelf of his closet, the one with his wife's notebooks and the pocket-sized ASL dictionary she always carried. The cover cracked softly when he opened it. 2 days later, they met again. Same cafe, same table. This time, Valerie arrived first. She had her hair down, no makeup, just a soft gray scarf and a leather-bound sketchbook beside her tea. When Jason sat down, he didn't say hello. He didn't have to. He tapped the table once and slowly raised his hand. His fingers shaped the word, "Hello." Valerie's eyebrows lifted. She smiled, not with her lips, but with her eyes. Then signed back, "Hi." And just like that, something in the air between them warmed. They didn't speak out loud, but they communicated. She showed him how to sign simple words. "Thank you, understand, coffee." He stumbled. She laughed. Silently but brightly. The waitress came and went. They didn't order much. He forgot what his drink tasted like. He remembered the way she watched his hands. At one point, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something folded. Not the napkin. A drawing. Childlike. Shaky. A house. A tree. 2 stick figures holding hands. "I found this in a book," he said. "My wife drew it. She always said it was us. I never showed it to anyone before." Valerie took it gently. Her fingers brushed the edge. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pulled her sketchbook closer and flipped to a blank page. With a soft pencil, she began to draw. 2 people. Not stick figures, but quiet outlines, seated across from each other at a table. Their heads were tilted slightly inward. One hand was reaching across the table. When she finished, she turned the sketch toward him. At the bottom, in small handwriting, "Telling stories in silence." Jason couldn't speak. He didn't need to. He tapped twice on the sketch, gently, and smiled. She smiled back. That evening, when she left, she didn't say goodbye. She simply signed, "See you." He nodded. But after she turned the corner and disappeared, he stayed seated. Longer than he needed to. Because somehow, In a week filled with meetings, phone calls, and carefully calibrated decisions, that moment of stillness was the one he knew he would remember. Some stories begin with fireworks. Theirs began with pencils and silence. In the days that followed, Jason found himself checking his phone not for meetings or board memos, but for her messages. They were never long, never rushed. Sometimes just a photo of something quiet, a leaf on wet pavement, a page from a book with a line underlined. Sometimes she drew instead of typed. A page torn from her sketchpad with two hands reaching for the same cup. A napkin with a drawing of a man and woman sitting at opposite ends of a bench, their shadows leaning toward each other. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was presence. Stillness. A kind of companionship that didn't ask for explanations. And that was why it mattered. He met her one evening outside the center where she worked. She didn't expect him, but didn't seem surprised either. She was wearing the same soft scarf, her hair loose, a paint smudge on her wrist. He didn't comment. He didn't have to. They walked without destination. No music, no plan. Just city lights flickering against puddles and the soft rhythm of traffic. At a corner cafe, she paused and pointed at the window. Two elderly people playing cards in silence. Jason followed her gaze, smiled, then, without thinking, signed, "Like us." She looked at him and nodded. Inside, they ordered hot drinks. She brought out her sketchbook again, but didn't open it. Instead, she pulled from her coat pocket a folded piece of paper, thicker than usual. She slid it across the table. He unfolded it. Inside was a sketch, a rough replica of his late wife's drawing. The house, the tree, the two stick figures. But in Valerie's version, there was a third, a small bird sitting between them, wings open, silent, still. He looked up. She signed slowly. Some things return. Jason stared at the drawing, and for a moment he felt something that had been buried for years shift. Not break, just soften. Later that night he stood in his hallway, jacket still on, holding the paper in his hands. He looked at it for a long time, and that's when the thought crept in. The quiet voice he didn't want to hear. Did she know who I was from the beginning? The doubt arrived not because of something she said, but because of how natural it all felt. How perfect. And perfection, Jason had learned, was rarely honest. He hadn't told her his last name, hadn't mentioned the company. He liked the quiet too much to disturb it with facts. But Kristin had known. And if Kristin had told her sister, he didn't sleep. The next morning, he arrived at the cafe first. He held the napkin she had given him on the first night. The edges soft now, ink slightly faded. When Valerie entered, she smiled. She always smiled with her eyes first. She sat down, opened her notebook, but before she could draw, Jason leaned forward. He didn't accuse. He simply asked, with care, not suspicion, "Did you know who I was that night?" Valerie didn't flinch. She didn't avert her eyes. Instead, she calmly pulled out a pen and wrote on the blank page before her. "My sister told me, before she left. I stayed anyway." She slid the notebook toward him. He stared at the words, then looked up and asked, quietly, "Why?" This time she didn't write. She didn't sign. She simply turned the page and drew. Two stick figures again. One walking away, the other sitting across from a man at a table. And underneath, in gentle script, "Because you looked like someone no one had ever stayed for." Jason didn't speak. He didn't smile. But his hand closed over hers. Not tightly, not deliberately. just enough to let her know he understood. Outside, the wind picked up. Leaves fluttered past the window. People moved on sidewalks, busy with noise, with speed. Inside, at their table, two people sat in stillness. And for the first time since his wife's funeral, Jason didn't feel like he was surviving his days. He felt like he was living one. Some silences are healing. Others are knives with ribbons on the hilt. It had been 3 days since Valerie's quiet answer in the cafe. 3 days since Jason had held her sketchbook, read her truth, and felt something quietly rearrange itself in his chest. They hadn't spoken since then, not because there was distance, but because the silence was enough. Their connection didn't grow through constant contact. It grew like roots underground, unseen but deepening. That was why the voice startled him. It was sharp, familiar, and completely out of place. Jason Lewis? He turned. They were on the sidewalk outside a bookstore. He and Valerie had just parted after a brief walk. Her back was still turned, her pace slow, unaware. The voice came again, louder this time, touched with disbelief and something sour. "Oh my God, I knew it. It really is you." Kristin Davis stood there, flawless as always. Oversized sunglasses, long coat, perfectly timed smile. She didn't look at Valerie, just Jason. "I thought you looked familiar," she said. "But I figured, what, no PR team? No press? So I walked out. Imagine my shock when my sister tells me she stayed." Valerie froze. Her fingers clenched slightly around the strap of her bag. But she didn't turn. Not yet. Kristin's tone shifted, silky, sweetened with venom. "You should have told me who you were. Things could have gone very differently." Jason's face didn't change, but Valerie finally turned. She didn't speak, didn't sign. She just looked at her sister. Calm, steady, quiet. That quiet was louder than any insult Kristin could have thrown. Jason stepped forward, shielding Valerie gently with his shoulder. "She didn't stay because of who I am," he said. "She stayed because of who she is." Kristin blinked. Valerie still didn't react. She didn't need to. Her presence was her answer. Jason turned to Valerie. "Walk with me." She nodded. They left Kristin standing there, blinking behind her designer lenses. Neither of them spoke for several blocks. Finally, as they turned into a smaller street, Valerie pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, the same one she had clutched when Kristin approached. It was folded, slightly wrinkled at the corners. She handed it to Jason without a word. He opened it. It was a sketch, rough, unfinished. Two women, one standing tall, arms crossed, lips pursed. The other sitting at a table, eyes lowered, hand open. No words, just posture. At the bottom, "Sometimes the loudest people hear the least." Jason let out a slow breath. That was intense. Valerie signed almost playfully, "You haven't met our mother." He laughed, a real one, brief and surprised. She smiled just barely, then reached for the paper, turned it over, and began sketching again with a pencil she always seemed to carry. A window, a man sitting alone, a woman entering quietly, a new scene forming. He watched her hand move, steady and sure. "You really did know who I was," he said softly. "But you never once mentioned it." She paused, looked up. Then, on the bottom of the paper, she wrote, "I didn't need your name to hear you." And Jason, who had spent years surrounded by people who saw his title first, felt something cave in quietly inside him. Not collapse, not break, but surrender. The kind that happens when someone finally sets down what they've been carrying alone. They sat on a nearby bench for a while, just watching the city breathe around them. Before they parted, Valerie reached into her coat pocket and handed him another drawing. Smaller this time, simpler, a hand drawn in pencil, palm open, waiting. Underneath it, just 2 words. Still here. Jason didn't say anything, but when she left, he folded the paper carefully, as if it might tear with too much pressure, and placed it not in his pocket, but in his wallet. The next morning, he opened his laptop at the office. His calendar was full. Calls, deadlines, numbers, deals. But in the space between 2 meetings, he pulled out the drawing and smiled. Not because something had begun, but because something had stayed. There are places that don't welcome suits. Not because they're formal, but because they feel like they don't belong. The Children's Center was one of them. It stood behind a chain-link fence, its walls painted in faded murals of trees and clouds, some half-finished, some redone in smaller, Messier hands. A green door creaked when opened, and inside the world quieted, not in the way of libraries, but in the way of safe places. Jason had stood across the street for 20 minutes before walking in. He didn't wear a blazer. He left his phone in the car. He didn't bring flowers, just one folded drawing in his pocket, and a pencil in his hand. The receptionist looked up as he entered, her expression curious but not guarded. "Can I help you?" Jason hesitated. "I'm looking for someone," he said softly, then added as if it explained everything. "Valerie." The woman tilted her head. "She's finishing up an art session. Should I tell her?" "No," he said. "I'll wait." The room smelled of glue sticks and paper and something gently sweet, like apple juice spilled long ago and still remembered. On the far wall, children sat in a semicircle around a table. Some colored, some signed, some simply watched. And in the middle of it all, Valerie, hair up in a loose twist, sleeves rolled, hands moving gently through the air as she signed something to a boy beside her. She didn't notice Jason at first, but one of the kids did, a little girl with braids and bright pink sneakers. She pointed. Valerie turned. Their eyes met. She didn't smile right away, but she didn't look surprised either. Jason lifted his hand, not to wave, but to sign. "Hi." Valerie blinked. Then slowly she signed back. "You came." He nodded. She stood and walked toward him. Not rushed, not cautious, just steady. When she reached him, she didn't speak, but she lifted one hand, gently brushing invisible dust from his shoulder. The smallest gesture, simple, practical, and deeply intimate. He held out the folded paper. She took it, unfolded it. Inside her sketch, the one she had given him before. But now, in his handwriting, he had added one word beneath her caption. "Still here." She looked up. "I didn't know if I was welcome here," he said quietly. Valerie didn't answer. She turned the paper over, reached into her back pocket, and pulled out a pen. She wrote, "Some people bring noise. Some bring presents. You've only ever brought one." He swallowed. Behind them, a child called her name in a voice like a bell, soft, imperfect, but full of trust. Valerie turned, signed something quickly to the child. 1 minute. Then looked back at Jason. She gestured to a bench near the wall. They sat. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "My world doesn't move slowly," he said. "Meetings, deals, numbers. It's all motion. But with you, everything pauses." She listened. He continued, I thought that was dangerous, but now I think it's the only time I really hear myself. She reached into her bag and handed him a card. Handmade, textured, not a Hallmark template. Inside, another sketch. Crowded room. Everyone in motion, blurry, fast. And in the center, two people standing still. Underneath, you don't have to move to matter. He looked at the card, then at her. I'd like to stay a little longer, he said. If that's okay. Valerie didn't nod. She didn't speak. She simply extended her hand. Palm up, open, waiting. Jason placed his in hers. No grip, no squeeze, just skin to skin. Connection. And this time it was he who signed. Still here. Some stories end with a kiss. Theirs ended with a choice. It was early evening when Valerie stepped out of the center. The sky was pale, almost the color of paper, and the air smelled like new rain on warm pavement. She had stayed late, helping a child finish a drawing he was too afraid to show anyone else. She wasn't expecting to see anyone waiting, but there he was, Jason, not in a suit, not behind a car window, just standing there in that same worn coat, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. She approached slowly. No rush, no surprise, like she already knew he'd come. When she stopped in front of him, he didn't speak. Instead, he held out a thin, folded piece of paper. Not a letter, not a contract. It was a napkin, the very first one, still creased, still smudged, still soft at the corners. And underneath it, a new one, with a single sentence in handwriting not quite as neat, but careful. I'm still learning how to listen like you do. Valerie read it twice, then looked up. Jason reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a small black notebook. Inside, the pages were filled with notes, messy diagrams, scribbled practice lines, fingers forming letters, common signs. Her name. He held it out. I've been practicing, he said. I wanted to be able to answer, even when words fall short. She took the notebook with both hands, cradled it like something fragile, then closed it gently, and signed, "Then you've already heard me." They stood there for a moment. In that perfect stillness, only strangers who've become something more can share. Then Jason pulled something else from his pocket. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't dramatic. It was a small folded drawing. Her style. But his hand. Two figures on a bench. Hands touching. And between them, a soft pencil line shaped like a bird in flight. Below it, her own words rewritten in his handwriting. You don't have to move to matter. Valerie pressed her lips together. Not from sadness, but to keep everything inside from pouring out too fast. She stepped forward, just slightly, not to embrace, not to fall into his arms, but to be beside him. Then, reaching into her coat, she handed him a final drawing. 3 panels. In the first, a man sitting alone at a table. In the second, a woman placing a napkin in front of him. In the third, 2 hands, signed together in the shape of the word, stay. Jason looked up, and this time, she didn't look away. They didn't say goodbye, didn't need to. They simply turned and walked together, side by side, through the dimming street. No soundtrack, no last words, just steps, and the knowledge that someone had stayed long enough to hear the silence.